my key message to people is don't look at pet food companies as the evil people. They're not.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, whenever you are. Welcome. Welcome to iCheck, the newest podcast of bioanalytics. If we are what we eat, can we say the same from our pets? If you walk down the pet food aisle, you will undoubtedly be overwhelmed by the endless amount of options. May I ask you this question? Picture this. When you feed your pet, what are you feeding it with? It's important to take a few moments to research and understand what we are putting on their plates. Because providing your pet with well-balanced and high-quality food is one of the best things you, as a pet parent, can do to fuel a happy and healthy pet. But how can you be sure you're picking the best food or treats for your dog or cat if you're not sure what quality pet foods are? Don't worry, because I got you covered. My name is Ana Catarina, and in this first episode of this podcast, I have the pleasure to invite Jeff Allix, Global Head of Business Development at Veramaris. We are going to have a conversation about the importance of providing high-quality pet foods to the owners. This is a real deal, everyone. Jeff Allix is a serial expert in this area. He has worked in this area for over 20 years, in companies like DSM and now at Veramaris. And also hosts a podcast named The Healthy Perspectives, brought to you by Veramaris. Each week, he discusses all things pet related, alongside some special guests from the industry. So don't forget to check it out after our talk. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Just write it down, bioanalytics on Facebook or LinkedIn, and also share this podcast with a true pet lover. Jeff, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and being our very first guest in this podcast. So super fresh.
You're welcome.
And well, let's start. And let's start by exploring the concept of balanced diet for pets. And the first question that I would like to make you is, what is a balanced diet for pets? What does this means, and why is so essential to ensure this high quality?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Anna Karina. So, like humans, every species there is been a lot of nutritional research done over the years, and what we have are animal nutritionists trained at university to put together the right nutrient components for the species. So if we're talking about pets, we've got dogs, cats, we have birds, and we have a lot of small animal type pets. We call them pocket pets, and all of those species have very unique nutritional needs. And the animal nutritionist would be the person that would know what those needs are. So really, it's about using a formulation software, and there's quite a few of them on the market, where they put together what the nutrient profile of each ingredient is, and then they put those ingredients together to achieve, protein levels and the right fatty acid profile and minerals and vitamins and all the things. And again, each species has a different nutritional requirement, so they have to target for those different species.
So, in my understanding, if we simply provide home prepared food for pets, we are compromising the supply of nutrients, right?
Well, actually, there is a way now. So, feeding your own pet food has become um, a very special topic among pet owners around the world, and it's not so uncommon to find companies that say, "We'll give you recipes online." You may have to pay for them, but you get a recipe and they tell you which ingredients to buy and put together. And mostly, though, they have to probably sell you a nutrient packet for the vitamins and minerals because you can't just use the human ones. So they might send you the micronutrients in a package as part of their service, and give you the recipe to follow. So it is possible. The challenge is it's not regulated. Okay, we'll talk about that more, I think, as we go on. But it's really comes down to who do you follow and who do you trust, and not everybody knows what they're doing when it comes to nutrition.
Oh, I can imagine. And to assure that the pet food is supplemented with the right amount of micronutrients, are there also like standardized values like we have in humans, for example? It depends on the type of animal. How does this work?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate in Europe, where you reside, and in the U.S., where I reside. There are governmental bodies that dictate the nutrient requirements for many species of animals, including all pet animals. It's and those are dictated governmentally in the U.S. It's the Food and Drug Administration Center of Veterinary Medicine that outlines the requirements, and they work together with the American Association of Feed Control Officials, and they put out guideline documents for companies to follow as minimums. And then in Europe, we have the European Food Safety Authority. They do the same thing. And then many other countries in the world will adopt either one of those, or sometimes they don't. So it depends on which country you're in outside of Europe and outside of the US.
Hmm. And how is that assurance is made? How, for example, is assured the quality of pet food during production? How is it assured? Is there like a government regulations as well? How is this proceed?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question. And it's always fascinating. In the 30 years I've been in this industry, I've found this to be probably one of the most fascinating aspects. And though it's a little scary, it's still fascinating. And that is the fact that if you think about governmental bodies, so you have the authorities working with animal nutritionists, putting together minimum nutrient requirements to make sure that every pet is safe, right? That it's eating its minimum nutrient requirement. But that's only one step. The other step is policing that, right? To make sure that these products that are in the marketplace, in fact, are delivering on that minimum. And this is where it comes to be a little bit challenging because when you police, you have to pick and choose who you police, okay? So here's a little hint. If you are a big pet food company with lots of brands in the market, and say the authorities see that you are probably supplying 50% of the population the food, and then there's a little tiny company selling pet food that's maybe supplying 1% of the population, which one would you spend the time policing? The one servicing 50% of the population or the one selling to 1% of the population?
I would go for the biggest chunk, right? The
Yeah, the
50%.
biggest one, correct, because you're going to have the most impact. So if you have only so many police that you can put, so they'll police meaning they pull the food off the shelf, they take it to the governmental labs, they analyze it to make sure that it meets. So when you buy major brands in the market, you know that there's the risk of having nutrition outside of the required nutrition is very low because they're policed so heavily. If you get a very minor brand in the market, it's a little bit more risky. Okay, just apply a little logic, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. This is applies everywhere.
What kind of specific quality control measures
Yeah,
do you use to ensure, these lines of consistency and quality?
yeah. So my experience is I worked for Nestle, one of the biggest pet food companies in the world, and um, it starts in the supply chain. So you have experts. I was an ingredient expert within the organization. I would go to the suppliers of all the different raw materials, make sure they're following very strict quality standards, make sure that they're testing their product. If there was some reason to believe that they weren't testing their product to the standards we needed, but that was the only supply, we would test that ingredient when it came into the factory to make sure it was it, so that when you put that recipe together in production, that the end result is going to be a better quality product. And then you usually test the finished product to make sure that all of the critical nutrients are are above the minimums, are where they need to be. Okay, but again, as you go down to the smaller and smaller, it comes down to combination of the smaller company's knowledge, expertise within the organization, or hired expertise, and just the resources that they have, because that's a very resource intensive activity for a pet food company. So obviously, the big brands have the resources to do all this in the supply chain checks. The smaller companies, it's a little more challenging. That's all.
Well, and I assume there is a lot research in the back. But I'm curious to know how long can it take from the first like formulation of a pet food until the end of the supply chain? How long can it take? Months, days, weeks? How long can it take that process?
That's a great question. I know the major brands better, but I do know some of the smaller brands. The smaller brands can move very quickly, and there's a reason for that because they're less complex organizations. They can make decisions faster. They can leverage their suppliers more heavily. They can move faster. They can get a product. The fastest product, like in Australia, there was one company I work with that said they could get a product from concept to the market within 3 months. Very rare, though, extremely rare. Um, but I would say for the major brands that we all know, things like Kitty Cat, or I'm trying to think of more. Your audience is more European, so Whiskas and some of these bigger brands. They refresh those brands probably every 3 years. Okay, to come out with a new brand, it's a new formulation altogether. It probably takes 3 to 5 years, depending on how novel. So, for example, insect meal is becoming a very, very new and novel source of protein, right? A more
Mm.
sustainable source. Our Veramaris Pets algal oil, an alternative to fish oil, EPA and DHA omega 3s for it takes them a long time because it's new and novel, and they have to do a lot more background work to make sure that it's safe and is bioavailable to the animals, and they thrive on it before they will put it in the market.
Mm. And so this is what you expect from the future of pet food, like using alternative like insect based
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah, so there's a battle that maybe most consumers are not aware of, and there's a battle between sort of the trends, like what we call the origin story, or the meat first, or wild animal, and some of those conflict with, say, the more sustainability trends that are coming. So for example, if you have a lot of land animal proteins in your pet food because you want to have a high meat content, that's got in most cases, that has a very low, very poor environmental footprint. Okay, because land animals just are very heavy in environmental impact. But then you on the other hand, if you have things like insect meal and all that, they're new, novel. Consumers a little bit nervous about it, but the effect is you could come to very sustainable pet food where the footprint is much lower. So there's these sort of dynamics that go on in the marketplace. That's kind of interesting to watch.
Well, taking the opportunity to talk about that sustainability topic because, of course, it's a hot topic. And what is the pet food industry doing? Also taking actions regarding sustainability, or is a reality check is still needed?
So, I think it's been front of mind for consumers for some time to want to have a look, especially the newer generations of consumers that are out there truly demanding more sustainable products, including those for their pets. And I know a lot of companies that have been trying for quite some time to get their supply chain, because it really is about working with suppliers that are also in line with that purpose, and getting that all aligned with their own production and social responsibility and so on. Well, the Pet Sustainability Coalition, a US based NGO, the only one that I know of in the world that is focused on pet industry, has a lot of presence in North America and in Europe. And they have tools, they help pet food companies become more sustainable. And they use a variety of different training tools and analytics and external third party certifications to help companies really find the path. It's challenging for big companies. But if you look on the websites of most of the major brands, most of them start to talk about sustainability. So it has been something that's been on the minds of each of these brands for at least 10 years or more. So it's not a matter of do they want to do it, it's a matter of how can they do it and make sure that it's validated, and measurable, and then that they can make it sustainable for their business. Because if it's too expensive, how are they going to afford it unless they pass that price on to the consumer? And many times the consumer, even though they say they want sustainability, if you tell them they're going to have to pay 2 times more for the pet food, they're going to say no.
Hmm.
System. But yes, I don't think it's, I think to answer your question, it is reality in today. And there
Hmm.
are organizations and companies that are thriving to do this because we're all aware that we cannot continue to take from the earth more than we give back. So,
And Jeff, you work for Veramaris, and you also have a podcast brought by Veramaris that is called The
yeah.
Healthy Perspectives.
Yes.
Um, we talked a lot about sustainability, but as an expert in this area, working now for Veramaris, what kind of barriers do you encounter besides the sustainability topic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably the if you really think about it, the biggest barrier is 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 knowledge, right? Because the more you understand about the challenges that pet food companies face in achieving the goal of becoming more sustainable and and higher quality, it's really comes again back to you have to have the whole supply chain, your packaging suppliers, your ingredient suppliers, your the companies that you buy your equipment from to produce the food, and the distributors and all the trucking. And you can imagine there's what's called a life cycle assessment, where basically you have to look from the time that you pluck that grain off the earth to the time you take the fish out of the ocean or the land animal, and you go through and that's those raw materials are produced, shipped to warehouses, from warehouses to factories, from factories are produced to pet food, then they're sent to distributors and then out to the grocery stores or pet stores. We pick it up, we bring it home, we feed our pets, we throw the packaging away. The whole cradle to grave life cycle is involved. Veramaris is very much focused on ocean preservation. Overfishing is a big topic. It's one of the biggest breaches of the planetary boundaries, which means the habitability of the Earth is impacted the most by the loss of fish species in the ocean. And we take out 930 billion fish out of the ocean every year just to supply the pet industry fish oil and fish meal. And we're the smallest users of all the other industries.
Oh my God.
So it shows you the magnitude of the problem. And that's just seafood sustainability, not to mention, greenhouse gases and all that. So it's quite a complex situation for companies. They have
Yeah.
a lot of work to do.
Wow. And and what do you think it's missing in order to solve these problems?
I think the more, so if you look at the whole, what drives everything, it's the consumer. Ultimately, it's the consumer. If the consumer demands it and said that they would pay more for a more sustainable pet food, a more nutritious pet food, then the retailers say, great, I can charge more for the pet food. Then they can pay more for the pet food that they buy to put on the shelves, right? And then the producer of the pet food has more money to be able to invest in more sustainable practices, better quality raw materials, and everybody along the supply chain can make money. Because what's happened is, if the consumer says, I don't want to pay for this because I don't understand it, then he squeezes all the profit out of it all the way through. What you end up is mistakes and problems and no money to fix them.
Wow. Thank you, Jeff, for all the transparency and honesty around this topic. I had absolutely no idea the dimension of what it was really going on in the pet food industry. And I'm pretty sure that everyone that is listening right now also didn't have this idea. So thank you for bringing the awareness. For I don't want to take any more of your time. So yeah, let's go to the last questions. If we decide to visit a pet food plant, if we decide to
Ah.
visit, can we do it? Can I go make you a visit at a
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not a pet, I don't work for a pet food manufacturer. I work for an ingredient supplier, right? So, but to answer your question, um, transparency is one of the more powerful trends that are out there. So you do find more and more pet food companies allowing consumers to come in and into the, obviously suppliers, quite a few suppliers are welcome to go in. But when we're talking about consumers, there's some that are starting to build, walkways around the factory with windows so you can see in, because you have to be careful, because you don't want people to come into the production space because it's highly controlled from a safety standpoint, right? You don't want people's jewelry falling off into machinery, and you don't want people sneezing or causing, contamination. So it's like any other food plant. You have to keep a barrier there. So some have put the money in and created it. So you have viewing windows, so you can see what's happening in production. Others, they just haven't gotten there yet, and they haven't. It's not that they're hiding anything. They just simply, it's a big investment to add, a way for and of course you have to have hosts to host people. It's just money, right? It comes down to money. So it's, yeah. So some pet food companies you're going to see will allow the consumer to come in, um, and others won't, because they don't have a safe way to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Jess. Thank you for the
Sure.
hint to all the pet parents out there.
Yeah, good. And thank you for doing this podcast. I think this is the information that we need to get out there in the world, to the professionals, to the consumers. We need to help them, and hopefully they'll listen to your podcast, they'll listen to our Healthy Perspective podcast on Spotify, and be able to start to learn from different experts in the industry. So thank you for hosting this. This is great.
Thank you, Jeff. Any final thoughts regarding this topic that you want to leave our audience with?
Yeah, yeah. Just, the professionals know how hard they're working to make pet food quality really good. It's baby food. Everybody in the industry treats it like baby food. It's no longer the feed industry product of 50 years ago. It is baby food today, and it's regulated like baby food. And the people in this industry are passionate about it. So my key message to people is don't look at, pet food companies as the evil people. They're not. Even the big companies, the big food companies, Mars, Nestle, and all the others, they really are trying to bring the best nutrition forward and keep the product as safe as they possibly can. And in some cases, like COVID, where the people are not being able to come to work and all that, they're really stressed out, in trying to meet that objective. So just, I just ask people to not criticize them so much, um, but and continue to share your thoughts with them. They really need to know what you want, and they'll strive to meet that need.
Great message to
Yeah.
end this podcast. Thank you so much, Jeff. Hope you
You're
have a
welcome.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too now. Bye bye.
Bye. And thank you for listening to our podcast.